Every country has moments it celebrates, moments of pride, moments it teaches with confidence. But there are also moments that sit quietly in the background, moments that are painful, uncomfortable, and often avoided. Moments that make us ask one simple question: how did this happen? This is not a story about dislike, it is a story about truth. Because history has a pattern, what we ignore, we often repeat. Today, we look at some of America's darkest moments, not to judge the past, but to understand it and, more importantly, to learn from it. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, American soldiers from Charlie Company entered a village known as My Lai in South Vietnam. What followed became one of the most controversial events of the war. Hundreds of unarmed civilians were killed during the operation. At the time, the U.S. military initially reported it as a successful mission against enemy forces, but investigations later revealed the reality. When images and reports reached the public in 1969, it sparked outrage across the United States and intensified opposition to the war. Only one officer, Lieutenant William Calley, Jr., was convicted, and even his sentence was reduced. The lesson here is clear. When systems fail to hold people accountable, trust begins to break, and when people are dehumanized, it becomes easier for injustice to occur. In 1955, a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till traveled from Chicago to Mississippi, where he became the victim of a racially motivated killing. At the time, the United States was still deeply divided by segregation laws, especially in the South. What made this moment different was the response. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, chose to hold an open casket funeral, allowing the world to see the reality of racial violence. Images published in magazines reached millions and became a turning point for the civil rights movement. Activists, including a young Martin Luther King Jr., would later cite this moment as one that inspired action. The lesson: awareness creates movement, and when truth is exposed, it can push a society to confront itself. In 1898, in Wilmington, North Carolina, a multiracial government was in place, something rare at the time in the United States. However, tensions grew as white supremacist groups spread fear through newspapers and political campaigns. On November 10, 1898, armed groups forcefully removed elected officials and took control of the city. Many black citizens were forced to leave, and the balance of power was permanently changed. It remains the only successful coup d'etat on American soil. The lesson: democracy is not immune to manipulation, and misinformation, when combined with fear, can destabilize even established systems. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City became the site of one of the deadliest industrial disasters in U.S. history. The factory employed mostly young immigrant women who worked long hours under difficult conditions. When a fire broke out, many workers could not escape quickly due to inadequate safety measures. The tragedy led to public outrage and eventually to major reforms in labor laws, including improved workplace safety standards and fire regulations. The lesson: meaningful change often comes after tragedy, but it also shows the importance of enforcing systems that protect people before disaster happens. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision in the case of Plessy v. Ferguson, which upheld laws allowing racial segregation under the doctrine of separate but equal. This ruling gave legal backing to segregation across many parts of the country, especially in public facilities like schools and transportation. It was not until 1954, in the case of Brown v. Board of Education, that this doctrine was overturned. The lesson: laws can shape society for generations, and if those laws are unjust, their impact can last far longer than expected. In 1865, months after the end of the Civil War, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Texas to announce that enslaved people were free. This moment is now celebrated as Juneteenth. However, it also highlights a deeper reality, that freedom had been delayed, and even after that announcement, formerly enslaved people faced new challenges, including discrimination, economic hardship, and limited rights. Juneteenth became both a celebration and a reminder, a symbol of progress, but also of unfinished work. The lesson: progress is not always immediate, and true equality often takes much longer to achieve than legal change alone. These moments are not isolated. They are connected by patterns of power, inequality, resistance, and change. They show how decisions made in one moment can shape generations, and how silence or action can determine the direction of a society. History is not just about what happened, it is about what we choose to do with it. We can ignore the lessons, or we can learn from them. We can repeat the mistakes, or we can grow beyond them. The goal is not to hate a country. The goal is to understand it deeply enough to improve it. Because no nation is defined only by its best moments. It is also shaped by how it responds to its worst. History is not just something we remember. It is something that warns us, and the real question is, are we listening?